Now, before I even get into it here, do be warned that there will obviously be major spoilers for the first episode of Season 2 of The Mandalorian, so if you haven't seen it yet and you don't want anything ruined, it's a really good time to click away. That said, I thought this was an interesting way to open up the season, and no, I'm not saying it was a bad episode by any stretch, or that I didn't like it. There was indeed plenty that I enjoyed about it, especially as a Star Wars fan who recognized a lot of things in here, and overall it was a very good episode. But as always, I try not to gush about something, but instead to talk about both the positives and potential negatives. And personally here, and you're always, of course, free to disagree with me, but I was hoping for an episode that kicked off a new season to be a little more big picture, if you will, to really set the stage for the rest of the season, which I'm not sure this one did so much unless Boba Fett is going to be a huge part of the season, which is certainly possible, and if that's the case, I'll take much of what I'm saying here back. Because honestly, this episode was really just all about getting to that reveal at the end to let us know, yes, Boba Fett is still alive, and it looks like he'll be after Din Djarin or the Mandalorian. And do not get me wrong here, it was awesome to see Boba Fett and see him outside of his armor and to have Tamora Morrison playing him again. I am absolutely thrilled at both prospects. And in many ways, that last 10 seconds of the episode makes the whole episode, even though, as I said, there were certainly plenty of other cool things in here and reasons to enjoy it, among them being just how great it all looks, that visually the show is stunning and we're getting near movie quality effects and production values out of the series. That Krayt Dragon, for example, just blew me away. But if you take the Boba Fett reveal out, there was really actually no other story progression here outside of us hearing that Din Djarin is looking for his people, for other Mandalorians, in order to hopefully find where the child or Baby Yoda belongs, which is something we already knew from the end of last season, and that we also had reiterated in the trailer, so it wasn't exactly too much of a progression of the story. And sure, as I've said before, not every episode needs to move the story along in leaps and bounds or have major character progression. The beauty of a long format show is that you can slow down and take your time and dig into the characters, as well as do more one-off type episodes that are just enjoyable as is, or even focus on smaller stories within the larger one from time to time. But again, with this being the first episode of the season, I hope to learn just a little bit more about what's been going on, or that bigger picture, even if it was just the Mandalorian simply saying whether or not he's still worried about the remnants of the Empire being after him and the child or not. Also, I thought this was maybe the most fan service heavy episode so far, though not necessarily in a bad or obnoxious way, just that there were a lot of things in here that only fans are going to get or recognize. And I do generally like and appreciate that sort of thing for the most part, don't get me wrong, and thankfully this wasn't the type of fan service that if the audience doesn't pick up on it, it doesn't understand what's going on, or the type that is so on the nose that fans who do recognize it tend to cringe. It was mainly little things like a Tusken Raider finding a Krayt Dragon pearl, for example. Or really just the whole fight sequence with the Krayt Dragon in general, which was awesome and gave me flashbacks to both Knights of the Old Republic as well as Star Wars Galaxies. I mean, when that thing was letting loose and really starting to kill everyone, I remembered the first time my guild in Star Wars Galaxies went after one of them and it was an absolute bloodbath. And this was shortly after the game had come out, and a lot of us didn't really know what we were doing or what was going on, and we were just in this valley on Tatooine, constantly getting annihilated by this thing. But anyway, setting that aside and moving on, I really enjoyed Timothy Oliphant in there as Cobb Vanth, a character that was first introduced in the Aftermath trilogy, where we originally got the story of how he came by Boba Fett's armor, though it wasn't confirmed to be Fett's armor at the time, just heavily implied, and now clearly after seeing this episode, it is indeed Boba Fett's armor he came by. However, speaking of that story in the Aftermath books, which actually happened in interlude chapters across the 3-book trilogy, well, there are certainly some changes or simplifications made to it, at least when compared to the story Vanth told The Mandalorian. Though something to keep in mind here is just because a character says something or tells a story, doesn't mean it is 100% true or accurate. In other words, characters can, in fact, lie, or maybe he just didn't want to divulge the full story, or he felt it was easier to tell a shorter, simpler version of it, and left out a lot of details. Still, it does kind of feel like a break in the canon, one some people probably won't care too much about, considering not everyone loved the Aftermath trilogy. Anyway, Oliphant is a fantastic actor and gives a great performance here, and I hope and think we'll see more of Cobb Vanth later in the season. And I really enjoyed that moment when he took off his helmet and Din Djarin froze because he immediately knew he wasn't a real Mandalorian, which really makes me wonder if this will set something up down the road when he encounters, say, a character like Bo-Katan, and she takes off her helmet, which leads him to believe she's not a real Mandalorian, which could be fun, and at which point maybe we can get this whole helmet thing explained finally. Because as anyone who's seen Clone Wars and or Rebels knows, or who knows the old EU, Mandalorians not taking off their helmet has never really been a thing. Not saying it isn't an interesting concept or idea or a way of life for their kind on its own, but it's been contradicted in many, many other places before in the canon. This isn't like Cobb Vanth altering some details in a story that, again, he could purposely be simplifying just for the sake of it. This is something that doesn't align with everything else we've seen in regards to the Mandalorians. Though I do suppose it is possible that Din Djarin is part of some offshoot type clan of Mandalorians that have developed their own ways or follow the old ways or something like that, even though he seemed to get rescued by Death Watch as seen in a flashback from last season. So maybe it's a more extreme version of Death Watch, I don't know, but it'll be very, very curious to see what happens when, or if, I guess, he encounters, again, someone like Bo-Katan, who then takes off her helmet, as she has many, many times before. Anyway, another thing I really enjoyed about this episode was just Tatooine itself, that it makes this world feel even more alive and interesting. It was also great to finally see an actual, well, not actual, but to see a Krayt Dragon in live action. Ever since A New Hope, when we see those massive bones in the desert, I've always wanted to see that creature alive and attacking, and now we've finally seen it, though again, it's been in games and such before. It was also great to see more Tusken Raiders and to get to understand them and their ways a bit more. We see that they're not just animals, and maybe they didn't deserve to be slaughtered like animals by Anakin in Episode 2. It's just their world, they've been there for thousands of years, and they don't much care for anyone else, or most others, since they all do seem to love the Mandalorian, and I am curious to know why that is and how he learned their language and their ways, which sounds like something we could maybe learn about in a comic book at some point. One thing that was maybe a little surprising and goes along with not advancing the bigger picture is there wasn't much Baby Yoda in this episode, beyond all the moments the camera seems to cut to him for 5 seconds and he does something cute, as if to say, yes, I'm still here. And yeah, I know, how much else can you really do with him on a regular basis? Because I don't know if you want this to be like last season, where it felt like in every other episode he was in grave danger and got abducted or was about to be shot until someone stopped the assassin at the last second. And though there wasn't any real great personal moments between Baby Yoda and the Mandalorian, we did get a couple subtle reminders of how close they are. Like when Baby Yoda closed his carrier and hid right before Mando used the whistling birds, or when the Mando said he's seen worse when he was about to kill Cobb Vanth right there and then. But really, overall, not a lot of Baby Yoda in this episode, and not a lot between the two of them. So again here, and to start wrapping this up, I thought this would have made for a great mid-season episode, but was instead a somewhat curious way to kick off the season. One that to me implies Boba Fett will be a big part of things to come. Otherwise, you just spent your first episode and one of the 8 you have, not setting up much for the rest of the season. And though this episode is packed full of cool moments, especially for fans, and there was no shortage of action and visually this looks great, and it also sounds great, when stripped down to just the story of the episode itself, and when you take away all those callbacks and Easter eggs and the big Boba Fett reveal, there's honestly a pretty basic story in it, and that's not meant as a negative or a complaint. It just is what it is with this series. But do keep in mind, part of the idea of the show, and part of its charm to some, is that it is meant to be more simple and to capture that feel of an old-time western. And I think this episode pulls that off really well, almost too well, because again, other than Boba Fett, nothing was added to the bigger picture. Though I'm sure Boba Fett showing up is enough for some fans, maybe a lot of fans, to forgive any and all other little shortfalls this episode may have. Which is basically how I feel overall. It was a really solid and enjoyable episode on its own that has a lot of callbacks and Easter eggs, maybe borderline too many, and has an awesome reveal at the end that I can't wait to see explored further. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this first episode of Season 2 and the return of Boba Fett. Did you love it, hate it, or were you mixed about it? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.